Hi, today we're going to be looking at entity types. It seems pretty obvious, and much of it is very obvious, but there are some kind of ambiguous, difficult, slightly confusing elements to this. So, starting with book. Book, fairly obvious. If you have a book, you know it's a book. One important thing about books to remember is that there is a book that is written, it's then released, and there are potentially multiple editions of the book, hardback, softback, re-releases or republishing by another publisher. It gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. My general advice is to focus on one edition and use that same edition as the reference across the board. Brand, very ambiguous. That wouldn't be used in general. You would tend to use a company, but you might have a brand that's a possible distinction that Google would understand. Corporation is the most obvious. Kalicube SaaS is the company, and we'll come to what Kalicube Pro is later on. But my company is the legal entity. That is the company that I own, or that is operating, and generally will have a suffix such as incorporated, limited, SaaS in France, so on and so forth, LLC in America. Course, that would be an educational course, potentially online. Event series, now what's the difference there? An event series, Kalicube Tuesdays is an event series because we have multiple events within that series. PubCon would potentially be an event series. SMX would also be an event series with specific events, SMX London 2021, SMX London 2019, and so on and so forth, would be individual events within that event series. So that distinction is pretty important. Local business, difference between a corporation and local business is fairly difficult to define, but I would suggest using local business when you really only serve your town or your region. That would be a brick and mortar. People come and visit your business to buy things or to do business with you. A corporation would be more something where people don't come to your office, or you're national or you're international. Movie, fairly obvious. Music album, once again, like books, you can have an initial recording, but in fact the music album itself can have multiple editions, so you've got to be pretty careful about that as well. Music group, fairly obvious what that would be. Music recording, that's an interesting point, is that you have a song which is written, a music recording which is a recording of that song, and that music recording can be on multiple music albums, not only multiple editions of a music album, but also on different music albums with that same recording, and then obviously you would have different recordings of the song. So music and albums and books and everything in arts gets really complicated really quickly, so you've got to tread pretty carefully. Organisation is basically corporation, but would tend to be things like government organisations or religious organisations or non-profit organisations, where a corporation would be more money-making enterprise, and this would be not money-making enterprise, and it's more generic. So if you have a doubt, just use organisation. Person, fairly obvious, but then you would also fit in fictional characters. I've done loads of experiments on fictional characters. My schema markup describes them as person with an additional type, fictional character. Podcast series, if you've been following me, with Jason Barnard, or SEO is AYO, that's a podcast series with multiple podcasts within it. Similar to an event series with multiple events, is that the series is called With Jason Barnard ... and the multiple episodes within that are part of. Product, very wide. I would tend to stick to physical products for that. Service, now this is the interesting one, is a lot of companies, let's take SE Ranking, would tend to say, well, we're a corporation, but in fact SE Ranking Limited is the corporation, and SE Ranking itself, the SEO tool, is a service, software as a service. So be very careful about that when you're choosing your entity type. WordLift, another partner of Kalicube, WordLift is an Italian company, but it is also software as a service. So they would have two entity types, one of which will be the corporation, the physical entity of WordLift, the company in Italy, and the other would be WordLift software as a service, which is worldwide and on the cloud. Next up, software application. That would be something you would download to your phone. So WordLift could potentially be a software application, but the fact you don't download it to your phone means that I wouldn't describe it as such. So think more of software as a service would go in service. Software application is more something for your Android or Apple phone. TV series, much the same as podcast series with TV episodes, gets very complicated very quickly. I added that for my experiments more than for the people who are actually using Kalicube. Thing, very generic. If you don't know where to put it, or if we don't offer the entity type that you need, just use thing. That's the most generic entity type, and it will work across the board for anything. Oh, but it's not specific, and that's always a bad thing. If you can be more specific, be more specific. If you can't be specific, it's better to be like the categorization, generic. Pick the one that suits the needs best. Best not to try to be specific when being specific will be misleading to Google. Next up, vehicle, motorbikes, cars. Probably a bicycle would be a vehicle as well, or it might be a product. But this is kind of the philosophical side of it, where you need to make a decision. You need to sit and think, what kind of entity am I talking about? You make the decision and you communicate that to Google. The aim here is to educate Google to your perception of your entity. Obviously, your perception needs to be realistic. So vehicle could potentially be a bike, but you might want to say that's actually a product. And lastly, website. Now, a lot of entities are going to be websites. For example, a blog wouldn't be a brand, it would be a website. Search engine journal is a website. Search engine land is a website. So you would want to present a website when the website doesn't have any other function, i.e. its only role in the world is to be a website that people visit to read, for example, media websites and so on and so forth. So that's quick guides on how to choose the right entity type for your Kalicube project. Thank you very much.